Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Lead Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Today's special guest is Nicholas Bradford. So without further ado, Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Appreciate it.
Pleasure's mine. We're talking about one of my favorite topics, restorative justice. So before we get into that, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Yeah, Nicholas Bradford. I'm the founder of the National Center for Restorative Justice. We provide trainings for schools, administrators, districts across the country. We have kind of three hubs: Seattle, Portland, and Kansas City. So we host trainings there. We do have a new training that's offered in Chicago in August. And yeah, that's kind of what we do. We really try to help navigate conflict with schools amongst young people and adults, and adult staff conflict. We don't really distinguish that much between the strategies and tools that we're working with young people with, the same kind of strategies and tools that we're working with adults on, talking about accountability, understanding the impact of our actions, and then some repair work that has to happen. So yeah, we're doing all kinds of different things. Obviously, we got trainings, we've got conferences, and we do a lot of traveling to schools as well. So we ended up like inside schools doing consulting work, coaching alongside, running circles alongside teachers and conferences. We do a tiny bit of facilitation itself. So sometimes schools will call us in and like, if we've got a problem with these two students or this sort of circumstance happened at our school, so we can kind of like help and support those spaces as well.
Absolutely. And you have a conference happening in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, we got a big conference. This is our sort of schools conference here in Portland, June 26th and 27th. This is like, it's a big deal for us. It feels like a big deal. It's not going to be a huge conference. We got 150 people. That's going to be our max capacity. But we got Joe Brummer from Connecticut and Margaret Thorsberg from Australia coming in to the state. I'm really excited. So they wrote 2 books recently about trauma-informed schools and restorative justice. Marg goes way back in restorative justice, like 3 decades, kind of really like foundational in Australia. And she and Joe kind of paired up to do this like big research. 2 books now turned into 2 of these books on trauma-informed practices and restorative justice. How do we kind of do both of these things at the same time? Be aware of trauma and also engage in healthy, sustainable conflict. This is a different conference. A lot of times people bring in these really great speakers and you hear them for a keynote and you're like, great, I got an hour of Joe's time or Mark's time. And that's really not what we're doing. We've got like a full day training for each. We divide the large group into 2 groups. So people have a full day with both of them and basically a full day with us. We're splitting it half and half, kind of 2 days and 2 days, or half day and half day. So it'll be a little bit different, but people are going to get a lot out of the time that they spend here. It's going to be very different than a traditional conference where you go and you get an hour or 50 minutes at lunch with a group. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I like
come
that.
on over to Portland.
Yeah. So it's like an all day workshop type of format,
yeah,
right?
It'll be like sort of half a workshop with them, half a workshop with choose your own adventure with my staff, and then the next day will be half a workshop with them, half a day workshop with them, and then choose your own adventure with my staff. And we're trying to walk the walk of restorative justice, so we're really doing some relationship building. So each one of my staff members, I might have to jump in there as well. We'll run small group circles, so up to 15, maybe 16 people. And so we've got teachers, we've got administrators, we've got community folks. Part of what I miss and what I love about some conferences that I go to is meeting people. Like we want to go to places and meet people, and we're going to get some structured opportunities to do that. And then also reflect on the learning. So if you went to a part of Joe's talk in the morning, and I went to the talk in the afternoon, and we did different things in the morning, afternoon, in the afternoon, when we're finishing our day, we get to spend a little time like, hey, what'd you get out of that? What'd I get out of that? What was an aha? What was a question? Maybe you answer my question. And then there's another teacher or administrator that can speak to a different perspective if I'm a classroom teacher or I'm a community member. So we really think that structure as well is really kind of leaning into our work in restorative justice. We're really trying to walk the walk of a conference. How does it reflect our values of community? So those are big pieces.
Nice. And I was waiting on you to say it, but you're also an author.
Oh, yeah. I wrote a book. I founded the National Center for Restorative Justice in 2016, and we published and finished our book in 2021, kind of around the same time that my son was born. And so our next book will be a book on parenting and restorative justice. But really, it's the real world guide to restorative justice in schools. It really captures a lot of our ideas and principles, but we still hold trainings, obviously, just because there's so much to be gained from the in-person experience. But some people, they'll do a little pre-work and then come to our trainings. I kind of will support a book club or something like that for a school. And
Yeah, you're being too humble, man. I was like, man, go ahead and make yourself shine, man. Like, that's what I'm here for. So,
appreciate it.
All right. Let's get into it. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on what is restorative justice and how do we. I really want to focus in on scenarios because a lot of the times folks reach out to me and ask me, well, how should I have handled a situation or how do I respond? Sometimes when we do trainings, PDs, for example, kind of like what you were touching on, it's like, yeah, you get an hour and a half, but it might be a generic, it's a topic, but it may not be specific or relevant to an individual. So yeah, maybe I'm doing a training on, I don't know, classroom management, but like I have specifics regarding my classroom or student demographics, or it changes every semester, every year. How do I handle various situations? So people always ask me for talking points. People always ask me for like, what should I do? What should I say? So I want to start with you just defining restorative justice, and then we're going to just jump into some scenarios as far as like real world type of things that could happen in our schools, in our classroom, hallways, bathrooms, wherever, and how should they be handled. So let's go ahead and start us off with what is restorative justice?
Yeah. And to preface, the way we talk about it and the way I think about it is not the right way. And so it'll come across as that, but that's certainly not my intention. This is the way that we think about this and a strong framework to hold a school's culture. So, but the definition that we like to use, really easy and digestible, is a relational approach to conflict. And this kind of captures two different things, right? This relational approach to conflict. One is that we've got to be relational. We know that relationships are keys to the kingdom when it comes to schools and young people being successful inside schools, and many other places as well, but certainly we're talking about schools. And then being able to engage in the conflict. And so there's lots of stuff to consider, but I really want us to think about, if we are too focused on relationship, we're not doing restorative justice. If we're only building relationship, if we're only thinking about relationship building circles or compassion and things like that, and I definitely bias that direction. I'm going to be more compassionate to young people than a lot of other adults. That's just my nature. But if I'm not also sort of engaging in the conflict and saying, yeah, like, I want you here. This is really important. You're a great kid. I love being around you. And the thing that you did was wild. That was not okay. That was scary for other kids and maybe yourself. So what are we going to do about that? Like, we got to do both those things at the same time. This is why restorative justice is hard, is because it's not one or the other. It's not punitive. There are consequences, obviously, but it's not punitive. But it's also not enabling. If we are enabling, that's easy. That really gets to an easy place of like, oh, I'm sorry. So it's your story, your experience, your learning disabilities, like all those things get in the way of being successful here. And like, I pour my heart out, and that enables young people to keep doing the things that they're doing, to not learn from their mistakes. So we really hamstring their opportunities to learn when we are permissive or enabling, right? And the opposite, but similar problem around just consequencing, right? Just having really strong, clear expectations. If you do this, this happens. So balancing those two things, that's hard. And I want to be clear with folks, like, we're never going to say that restorative justice is easy or that we got easy answers, because each kid and each circumstance is going to be different. We have the same problem behavior with two different kids, and we're going to have to approach it differently. We're going to have to build more relationship in advance with one student, or lean on an adult in the building or another student in the building who has that relationship with that kid in order to leverage and push and sometimes cajole a young person into taking responsibility for their actions and eventually sort of making amends. Whereas another kid is like, oh yeah, this makes sense to me. Same outcome, same sort of problematic behavior. They're excited about it and they're like, yeah, I want to take responsibility for my actions and whatever. Like, there's lots of different things. And that feels difficult. And I mean, it doesn't feel difficult. It is difficult to do. And so when I talk about restorative justice, it's a relational approach to conflict, we're trying to balance relational and engaging in the conflict at the same time.
Interesting take. Most people that I talk to in regards to restorative justice, they talk about the proactive side. You got to create the culture, and the circles should be utilized not just for when something happens. So when the teacher says it's time to circle up, the students aren't saying, oh, well, who did something or what happened now, but they're used to being in circles and sharing and their weekend or whatever. So I've always had folks say it needs to be approaching it from a Like, let's reduce any type of situations or instances. So I just want to make sure that I'm hearing this correctly, because it sounds like you're let me just clarify, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So the work of relationship building, the culture building in school has to happen all the time.
Okay.
But we've run circles. I've personally run circles with young people, both in juvenile detention or associated with criminal behavior, and in schools, without any pre-work, without any sort of like preamble or culture building or anything like that. And so that's harder. If you have the opportunity to build a culture, whether it's on a team, a sports team, or a school, you're going to have way easier outcomes. You're going to be able to rely on those relationships to encourage, cajole, like help have other young people reflect in meaningful ways the impact that their actions had on the school community. Like that improves the possibility of positive outcomes greatly. But that's not where restorative justice starts or begins, or it starts or ends. Like, really, the magic of restorative justice is in the conflict. And there's lots of programs and lots of systems that do a lot of that pre-work too, the culture building, social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, equity work, all those types of, just being compassionate. Like, all those things are really important and set us up. And there's some practices inside the restorative justice system that we talk about that does that pre-work for sure, both at the school level, the classroom level, small groups, young people who might be struggling to build social relationships, find connected adults. You're going to have smaller groups and smaller support systems for them, so that we can rely on those relationships more directly when bad things happen. But if you're trying to PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports your way into a positive school culture, that's fine. We can talk about implementation of that and stuff like that, and where I might draw some lines on philosophy. You're going to have conflict, right? You're still going to have kids get into the fight. You can PBIS your way, like, as much as humanly possible, have reward systems and good expectations and clear expectations and positive relationships, but you're going to have kids who get into fights. You're going to have kids who pull a fire alarm because they're like, oh, what's going to happen? I'm going to pull the fire alarm. Like, then what do you do? So if I were to break it down, I don't know, 30 to 60%, right? 30% is like the pre-work, and then 70% is like the hard nuts and bolts of, like, when kids get into fights. It's not just fights, just like the little altercations of not meeting regular daily expectations. What do we do then? Do we just tell kids, hey, do the right thing? Hey, do the right thing. If you do the right thing, you get this reward, or you get this sort of like positive thing over here. Like, no, like, first, for me, and the way we think about this is like, that's an opportunity to talk about accountability. Young people, when they get into trouble, quote unquote, they are really, really apprehensive about taking responsibility for their actions. And I don't care what grade level it is. If they're in a comprehensive public school, they're very adverse to taking responsibility for actions. I've got a 4-year-old. I've done a ton of work with him about taking responsibility for your actions. And he still, sometimes, most of the time he's pretty good about it, but sometimes he struggles. And at different developmental ages, you get different levels of struggle. I want to see young people take responsibility for let's like really from the beginning, from the smallest stuff of like, hey, you were late to class. I don't need to say that. Hey, I noticed something. Hey, let's take responsibility. Let's just go around and take a little bit of responsibility at a time when we weren't responsible. That's low level, broad based over sort of practice. And that's not built into any other kind of culture building system. And that sets us up for like when that kid gets into a fight in high school, or the kid pulls a fire alarm because his friend dared him to in 9th grade, because it's like first 2 weeks of school and you're like trying to be cool or whatever, like as you move up, then if I can get that young person to take responsibility for their actions, that's the win. And we talk about later on how to manage impact, how to manage repair. I would say, back to that first question, 30% of it maybe is a sort of culture building and doing this stuff in the classroom and being like kumbaya, and then like 70% of it's like, all right, we're doing some stuff at the classroom level for expectations. We're doing some group accountability stuff. We're doing some small group detention, which detention look very different for us than it does in like how we sat in detention, staring at a wall for an hour. Very different, but there's extra time that we can sort of devote. And then obviously before or after a suspension, a fight, or drugs, or, the fire alarm stuff, bomb threats, that kind of stuff. Like, how do we have those conversations? That's the 70%.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Let's jump into a scenario then.
Yeah.
Let's say we got high school, 2 rival gang members. So let's just say one is from one gang, one is from another gang. You set up as much as possible to try to keep them from conflicting with each other, giving them different schedules. But parent-teacher conference comes up one day, or testing day comes up, and we forget because you got 100 kids or whatever, 100 plus kids. And we're, you knew that you're supposed to keep these two individuals separated, but you forget because it's a testing day. And so they both show up together at the same time. One thing leads to another. There's a conflict that ensues.
Yeah.
Now you have the choice of, I don't know, disciplining them, or actually, I'm going to stop there. If I'm school administrator, what are your suggestions as far as how do I proceed? They've got into a fight. What's next?
Yeah. So if there were an actual fight, I mean, like blows thrown.
Yes.
So my initial response is those kids are going to go home, and then you want to see about like what your tolerance level is for how long they need to stay home. My entry point at any point, so they go home right away. We conference with them. We talk about like, hey, this is what's going to happen. We're going to send you home. When you're ready to take responsibility for your actions and you have a conversation with me, great. Let's do this. Let's have this conversation. And this is what that conversation is going to look like. We're going to talk about you need to be responsible for your actions. What part did you play? How does it impact yourself, other people, the community? How does it impact that other individual directly? That's the conversation we're going to have. I need you to be willing and able to sit down with me and this other student in the same place and work on a plan to sort of move this thing forward.
Now, is this a suspension that they're staying home?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We work with all kinds of different schools, from like very kind of quote unquote nice private schools where kids, like the worst thing that they do is they cheat, or their social media, like excluding kids, and to places where there's guns and knife violence and kids are getting killed. That we run that gamut. So we got to be real about how we make schools safe and how young people can feel safe at school when those kind of things happen in and around school and also off campus. So yeah, that's a suspension. But the entry point back in, give them like the 30 days. You give them whatever the sort of like district recommended policy is. 7 days, 10 days, whatever it is. That doesn't matter. But my recommendation is you get that kid back into school, into the office, have a conversation with you and some student or adult community members as quickly as possible. Okay. Next day, day after. And we just run through these things like, hey, what happened? Tell me about the circumstances that led up to this. And I'll give you the whole backstory. And if there's other stuff going on, this kid killed his brother, something like that, well, maybe this isn't the sort of circumstance that we want to handle in this circumstance or with a sort of conference. But if it's traditional or like regular kind of things that we would think about, just beef, whatever, then we're going to go through the process. What happened? What was the thinking? What was the impact? I kind of package those three things up, and then we talk about like, what are we going to do now to make things better? We have those.
Now, are we doing it separate? Just so I'm clear, this is two separate meetings first?
Separate first, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In these like big cases, separate first, and we go through all four questions beforehand, and then we get them down, and we'll role play. Like, all right, okay, so one of my students will be here, or I will sit in, or another adult will sit in as this like other young person. I'm going to ask him like, all right, Nicholas, Sheldon's going to be here tomorrow or the next day or whenever we're going to meet. How are you going to say like how your responsibility taking to Sheldon? And Nicholas says, well, if you didn't and you shouldn't have and fuck you. And okay, cool. Like, let's try again. We're going to role play until we're in a spot where I think this could go well. It's not 100%. It's not going to be perfect, but I want to be over that 50% line of like, yeah, my odds are in my favor that this is going to go well. And then we did the same thing with the other student. And if they're both good, we're going to bring them together day 3 or 4, even day 2, depending on the level of violence that happened inside the school, depending on the level of like administrative support from the district, bring them together. And then there's 2 pieces that we mess up as we're sort of practitioners. One is the accountability. We're not clear. For whatever reason, I don't want young people, when I'm in facilitation and like people like me are in facilitation, to be like, whatever language they used, they'll say instead this euphemism like, I was really rude to a teacher, or I was mean, or I did something that was inappropriate. Like, get that out of here. I don't want any of that. I want specifics. I punched you in the face. I said the F word. I called you a fat whatever. Like, and I turned over a desk and I stormed out the classroom. Like, I want you specific. So accountability is really, really important. And then we go through the impact and the harm, the thinking and the harm. And then the other place that we mess up is the action of repair. So what happens is, I'll give you an example. Like, we had this group of girls that were kind of just social media, teasing, mean, like all the girl drama at each other. Their parents were on either side. This girl's teasing my baby, like how she needs to be suspended, all this stuff. And this mom over here is saying the same thing about her kid. We get down, And we're like, oh no, you both are being like real mean to each other. Like you have a lot. And so moms on both sides are like, oh, you're instigating this stuff. You have responsibility to take. So we do all this like real unpacking of the mess that these girls had made. The parents and the girls are like, cool, let's hug it out and let's move on. No, don't do that. They made
You
the
said
mess.
don't do that? Don't hug it
Don't
out?
do that. Don't hug it
Okay.
out. I mean, you can hug. That's fine. You can hug. But like, you got to do the work. You got to do the work after you hug it out.
Okay.
Cool. Like you buried the hatchet. Awesome. Now, because what we forget is it's not just these 2 or 4 girls that messed up. They were inside a school community where they were causing other extraneous harm to the classrooms, to other students, to younger students. These were 8th grade girls at a middle school. So these are other 7th graders are seeing this kind of behavior. So what their responsibility is to the school is to give back. So they got to do the presentations. They got to make the posters that put them in the hallway. They got to talk to the 7th graders as they're coming in, or the 6th graders as they're coming up to visit. Like whatever it is, they got to do the work. What we have, and so back to your example of the gang violence. Like we get these 2 kids who are like real tough, real hard, struggling to show emotion at any other point in their life, and then you get them in front of you and a couple adults and another couple young people, and they emote, they cry or whatever, or they say I'm sorry, and you like want to put, oh great, I put that in the win column. That's true, but it's not over. It's not over. You've got to do the work. And so that's where we mess up, is we see these kids who really struggle to emote, show emotion, show care for their classmates and their school, and really like, want to hug this teacher that they were like really rude to and like disrespectful, and kind of the ways they were like, what happened? You got to do the work, because the teachers as well will say, oh, it's okay. Like, I appreciate you really coming in here and sharing your perspective. And I didn't know that about your mom. And like, you've been in a hard spot. Yeah. And it's also not okay to tell your teacher and storm out the classroom. That's not okay. We can't like sort of just be permissive about that behavior. So these are the 2 places that we go wrong, which is the pre-work, which is the accountability, and then the post-work, which is the work, the work of apology, what we call the action of apology. Like we've got to do that work really well. And that has to coincide with ideally, kind of the relatedness to the harm is really key. It's not just community service for community service's sake, while in some cases that can be an appropriate response. But I wanted to be like connected to the harm that they caused. So if you're talking about those 4, that group of girls, they're bullying and harassment toward each other. Like let's talk about what they can offer to their school community, and even the elementary school, as ways to kind of combat bullying and harassment in the school community. There's lots of different ways. Don't just make community service up. Make it connected to the work that they're doing, that they should be doing. Does that kind of make sense? Is that?
Yeah, I'm with you. So is there ever a time, well, I actually got a couple questions. First question is, let's say that student is not ready, or either of the parties. Let's say one of the kids is not ready to talk about it. Like they're still upset. We just give them a couple days. Does the other student? So let's just say, all right. So going back to the two gang members, one of the students, after a day or 2, they're ready to talk. They're willing to hash it out, if you will. The other one, we're past a week, and we're like, this student's still not cool with it. We don't send that one kid that's ready to talk early back to school because it hasn't been resolved. So now they're missing out on instructional time, and they're missing out on opportunities to grow while one is trying to figure out. So how does that work out then?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. So the community has a responsibility. If what we call authors or victims, which in this case sort of both are authors. Right. One of the 2 parties isn't ready, isn't willing, that doesn't prevent us as a community from sitting in. And so what we would do is either have an author stand-in, a impacted party stand-in or something like that. You can sort of do this just as a community, like a circle, but you go through the same things. You're like, what happened? And then this young person, Nicholas, takes responsibility in a way that's meaningful to a larger group of kids and adults. And then we talk about, what was it thinking? I was thinking about respect. I was thinking about fear, and like, this kid's going to get me and I need to get him first. And then what's the impact? And then we let Nicholas talk about the impact. We let the community also share their impact, and places that he had maybe missed in his thinking. And then it's the same discussion around, what are you going to do to make things better? How do we move forward from here? What actions are we going to take? And so in collaboration with the community, you come up with a plan. Like, this is the stuff we're going to work on. I would put first on that plan, I want you to be ready to have a conversation if this other student come to a place where they're ready to have a conversation. That's first and foremost. That goes on the list. That's an agreement, not a prescription. I need to let Nicholas know, like, this is important. It'd be really helpful for both you and this other kid, but I can't force you to do stuff that you don't want to do. So on this topic of like forcing kids, which is really like, I had this experience with a middle schooler who got into sort of a tussle with a security guard. Him and a couple of friends were going to jump this other kid. Security guard intervenes, taking this kid in the office. He kind of punches and kicks at the security guard. And so we have a conference, and the assistant principal, it was great. I said, hey, you want to do some community service to make things better? He says, yeah, sure, I'll do that. That's not a real like positive like statement of like, this is what I want to do. But we had to talk about some stuff a little bit. And then like 30, 45 seconds later, he says, you know what? I don't want to do community service. I don't want to pick up trash. I don't want to work with the janitor. I don't want to do lunch duty, something like that. He's like 3 or 4 things that he didn't want to do. I was like, great. What do you want to do? You can tell me no all day long as you're also offering things that we can do. And as long as a school and as a facilitator, I have options to put in front of the student, then we can start working. Because if a kid tells me no, great, we got options, man. What do we want to do here? We got this and this and this, and you can work with this student or this teacher or here. We got community spaces outside the school that you can do community work at. And so that's a really important part of the system. So with this young person we're talking about in this example, if the other party is unable to come to the table, we just got to figure out the work that makes sense.
Okay.
So it could be find a mentor, be a mentor, stuff like that.
Thank you for that. That was a question that I've come across before. It's like, okay, well, one was ready to talk, but the other one isn't. So does that mean that the one student can't go back to school until the other one's ready? And then again, that can cause a whole thing. Yeah. So I'm glad you're able to explain that. Let's do this because for the sake of time, I want to throw out maybe something that might be on an elementary level. Yeah. What are maybe a challenge that you've seen at the elementary level? How should it be handled?
Elementary level stuff is a little bit different because there's less kind of big harm that happens. So what I focus on at the elementary is these 2 things, the first 2 questions, which is, I guess there's like question 1 and question 3.
Okay.
Which is what happened and then what's the impact. So with my son, who's 4, we just do what happened question. And today, so like literally we're going from having lunch, we're going to go upstairs. He kind of puts himself in the doorway. His little sister, who's 2.5, is trying to get through. He says, no, you can't get through. She's trying to squeeze through. He kind of pushes her down and then falls on top of her. So what do we like? Timeouts, what kind of options are there? So for me, I just focus on, because he's at this level, he's 4.5. My goal is for him to be very comfortable talking about what happened. Hey, what happened? I sit him down and I say, hey, sit on the stairs. I check on my little girl, and she's as tough as he is, even though she's 2 years younger. And she kind of bounces up. She's like, I'm good. But I hold her for a second, and then she goes off. And then, hey, what happened? And then he says, I was trying to give her a hug. Okay, cool. Yeah, but that's not what happened. You didn't actually give her a hug. And then he says, I grabbed her and then I fell on her. Okay, cool. That's what happened. And he knows that she cried and stuff like that, and that wasn't cool. And like we're in this sort of situation. I don't need to go through that. And developmentally speaking, I don't think he's ready for that focus. But after 1st grade, then we start focusing on impact. So kids who have problems at recess, kids who are kind of like maybe hallway roamers, we call them elopers, kids who elope. Like, cool, let's sit them down. Hey, what happened? You can get 2 or 3 of them at the same time. So we're not wasting a bunch of time. Hey, at recess, what happened? And we've got these kids at one of the elementary schools that we were working at a couple years ago. We had a lot of Afghani refugees come into the Seattle area, and lots of trauma, new language, new culture, wild experiences, but you can't just slide tackle each other on the pavement. Like, that's not okay. They're playing soccer. But we can bring them in. Hey, it's not a timeout. It's not sit on the wall. It's just come here. Let's talk about this thing. Let's take some time. What just happened? And then each of them go around. We need to make developmentally appropriate requests of that kid. What's the smallest thing that they can do in order to make amends? They get some wins in their column. A lot of kids in elementary school who are struggling with big behaviors, we got to figure out how to give them small wins in their column. And so having an adult say, hey, thank you, I really appreciate the community service that you did, even though it was an hour and a half, 2 hours, 45 minutes of supervising the elementary school, or going in and doing some additional reading with the 1st graders, like whatever that win is, they got to get some wins in their column. So it looks similar as far as like a sort of conference for those big behaviors, but 1, that's pretty rare. And 2, we got to make the expectations of work developmentally appropriate. So we're going to bring that stuff down to where they're at. But the lion's share of work in elementary school is accountability circles, classroom disruption type stuff, where kids are just kind of like too loud and disruptive and not being on task. And then recess. Lunch also, obviously, you can pull a table of kids who are messing around, who are struggling to sit, struggling to clean up their messes. You can take them aside and either do accountability work or kind of that detention level stuff, which is the accountability and the impact. Have them say it out loud. This is what I did. This is how it impacted myself, the school, the classroom, other people, and just rinse and repeat. If you have to do that 17 times with a group at lunch, then maybe we got to level that up and talk to their parents and like, all right, like we're gonna have a bigger conversation. But that's rarely the case. So yeah, that's what about like the elementary school space is like those bottom two tiers of restorative justice get a lot of work. And then when you get into middle school and high school, then you sort of have that sort of upper tier. And it just depends on your school, like where your balance is. Mm-hmm. Balancing toward a lot of like fights and fire alarms and bomb threats and stuff like that. Or are you balancing toward like not having accountability?
So it just depends. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'll tell you this, Nicholas. I'm glad that you were able to break a lot of this down and provide some actual solutions. How do we kind of navigate through this? I'd love for you to take us home with any final words of advice you want to provide to our listeners.
Yeah, restorative justice. The reason why it's qualitatively different than our traditional punitive systems or our like care and compassion is because it's a really active process in the sense that the system doesn't move forward until the young people or the adults who impacted our community or other people actually start the process. And what I mean by that is that first question about what happened. I'll give you the example of my son, who's again like 4.5. A year ago we started the process. A year and a half ago I started this process, and he would say like, "I don't want to talk about it." I'm like, "Cool, all right, that's fine. We can sit on the couch until you want to talk about it." And then for him, trying to wait me out was like 30 seconds, 15 seconds, probably more likely. But for elementary, them waiting us out becomes a little bit longer. Middle school is even longer. High school, even long, like days, weeks sometimes, where they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. And so that's a really important part of this process is it doesn't move forward until they actually participate meaningfully. And that means taking responsibility for their actions first and foremost. And then later on, it doesn't end. The process doesn't end until we say like, hey, what are we going to do to make things better? And then I stop making suggestions. Say, hey, what makes sense to you? How would you like us to move forward? And that kid, that student of that school will say, I don't know. Oh, cool. Yeah. This is the first time you've ever been asked this question about how do you make amends for the mess that you've made? It makes sense that you don't know how to answer that question. Here, and I turn over a list. I've got like this little like form letter. I turn around this list. Hey, here's a bunch of examples of things that people have done. Which one of these things do you want to explore? And they'll like randomly point to something and say, what's that? And then I'll explain. Oh, yeah, that's a letter of apology to the person that you've impacted. I don't want to do that. Okay, cool. What's the list all going down? And then what's this one? Oh, that's some mentoring. You can either be a mentor if you're in high school, middle school, you can be a mentor to younger kids. If you're in fifth grade, you can be a mentor to first graders. But sometimes middle school and high school kids need to find an older mentor. And hey, we've got this program with big brothers, big sisters. That might be something you'd be interested in. So yeah, that could be cool. All right. Now we start asking questions. What's this look like? And they start the ball rolling on a topic or an interest area where they think that they can author that repair. And I think that's why restorative justice is so different than our traditional systems, is because it really demands that people who impacted the community or other people, or sometimes themselves, are the first movers. School administrators and teachers are the first movers for safety, but when it comes to repair and sort of how do we move forward from here, those people who author these actions, those students, are the first movers. And that's why restorative justice is like one of the best systems that I've come across to heal from harm, to move forward from harm, and to make a school culture of connectedness and success.
Nice. Well, I'll tell you this. I really do appreciate your time. If we have some folks that want to connect with you, Nicholas, what's the best way to reach you online?
Yeah, best way probably is me personally, LinkedIn, Nicholas Bradford. You can just find me and probably tops on there. And then National Center for Restorative Justice.com or nc4rj.com. And hopefully we'll see folks at training or maybe even at the conference that's coming up real soon in June.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.